It's time to get real. This week, a kind client reached out to me to mention that she was concerned about me because I hadn't been posting as much writing content on TikTok, Instagram, and everywhere else. And, for some people, maybe you don't post that much, but for me, it's definitely the way that I reach out to as many fellow writers as possible, and that it's the way I find my audience. So my client was kind of right to wonder why all of a sudden I had dropped off. And I assured her I was fine, but let's be honest. I wasn't really that fine. And I did appreciate the call out, and it forced me to look at what was actually happening. I was dangerously close to burnout. And I believe that being close to burnout, teetering on the brink of it, this is something that happens to so many writers and creatives. And there's so many different reasons for this. Writing is a huge job. I think a lot of people underestimate how much work it is to do this thing. It's not just about jotting down a few pretty sentences. It's not just about writing and editing your work and publishing it. It's about promoting it, creating extra content, fostering your mailing list, growing your author platform, keeping up to date on publishing trends. And that's on top of every single other obligation we have in our lives. And let's face it, there's this pervasive idea that writing is not a real career. It's something of a selfish, cute little hobby that we have. So how dare it take away from the real things that we have to do? And this is not just something that other people tell us. This is something that we sometimes tell ourselves as well. And I know you've heard things like this, right? Like, oh, come on, come out with us. It's not like your book thing is ever going to be a career, or you have time to write tomorrow. Or come on, your book project will always be there. Your kids won't be this age forever. Have you told yourself that if you're a parent? I bet you have. Or, well, you have a real work deadline right now, so surely you can take a little longer getting your book done. I've said this to myself a million times. And yeah, sure, I can take a little longer getting my book done. And that's generally okay, but it's not okay if that someday stretches out to become never. As I record this episode today, I am actively clawing myself back from full on overwhelm mode. So if you're overwhelmed, you might listen to this and feel a little bit better about your life. And I'm going to be doing a little bit of whining during this episode. But if you're overwhelmed, or if you're trying to figure out how to juggle this writing thing with everything else, or if you're feeling guilty, or if you're having a really hard time following through with your writing goals, today's episode is going to be so very useful to you. Because having time and space to write is not something that just happens. Being able to juggle it all is not something that just happens, and sometimes it's not possible to juggle it all. So we're going to be talking about a lot of these things that are probably making you feel overwhelmed, on the brink of burnout, guilty, and also kind of like a terrible writer, person, parent, friend, all of those things. And this idea of making time and place for writing and making writing part of your life, this is a really important part of writing success. Is one of the big things I talk about in the mindset sections of my upcoming course, From Idea to Published in 6 Months. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about this course as well, because I think there are some things there that scare people where they think, oh, she's saying that 6 months is the normal amount of time that it should take me. And I assure you it is not. So listen on, because we're going to be talking about how to get these raging, overwhelming thoughts and patterns under control, stop them from making us feel bad, take back control of our writing lives, and make this a little bit more pleasant. Because when you start feeling guilty, writing stops being fun. And this is a huge vicious cycle that I want to help you to break out of. And breaking out of it is exactly as radical and violent and, extreme as it may end up being. This is all about a complete life change, pattern change, transformation that you really must go through before you figure out how to do what you need to do instead of doing it all. If you're a writer dreaming of becoming a successful author, join me, writing coach Karena Akhavein, on the How to Be an Author podcast, your weekly source for writing information, inspiration, and motivation. Welcome back to the How to Be an Author podcast. I am so glad you're here today, especially as I record this episode today. As I told you, I am actively clawing myself back from full on overwhelm mode. I literally had a little bit of a flip out that I'll be telling you about a little bit later in the episode, but it was time for me to take stock of what's actually going on and see it for what it is, which is, girl, you are dangerously overwhelmed. So let's talk about what that looks like for me. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, this might make you feel better, or maybe you feel that you're worse. Fair enough. It's not a contest, but sometimes it feels like I'm trying to make it into one. And maybe I just want the chance to whine for a little bit, but let me tell you what my writer's life looks like right now. And that might feel very, very familiar to you. So for me, I have more writing clients than ever. And that's a great thing, of course, financially. And also I love helping people and I get super inspired by each writing project I take on. But this takes time and it takes a lot of energy. And it does literally take time and energy away from not only my home life and my family life, but from the books that I am trying to get out, right? As a writing coach, how can I be a writing coach if I don't regularly publish books? So I have plenty of books under my pen name that I published before I did this whole writing coaching thing. And I've got the book that is under my name. That's the fiction book. And I've got a nonfiction book, but I have a big book coming out under one of my pen names. And I'm not going to explain this yet, but it needs to be out by a specific date, which is kind of frightfully soon. And it's not done yet. I've promised you all my massive masterclass from idea to published in 6 months. I promised it would be out this week, but the poop literally hit the fan this week. I have been in plumbing and construction hell. I've had Roto-Rooter at my house the whole week, which meant that I couldn't finish recording my modules without a jackhammer in the background. And I couldn't even do what I'm going to be doing this coming week, which is decamping to a quiet apartment to record the whole thing because, well, Roto-Rooter needed me there to answer crucial questions. In fact, as I record this right now, I know there's a chance I'm going to have to stop if the crew arrives and starts jackhammering anew. I have, like many of you, kids, pets, friends, volunteer work, my real work, more house tasks that I care to think about, and a husband who clamors for my attention. I have this podcast to produce and record. I have my author platform to maintain. I have another manuscript that's been sitting with 2 agents who wanted to see more of it for at least 3 weeks. And normally I'd be on pins and needles, but honestly, I'm glad I can ignore at least that one last thing for maybe at least a week more because it's all too much. Can you see how overwhelming this is? And this is normal, right? I'm not winning any contests in the overwhelm department. You probably all have these many moving parts in your lives, or maybe you don't. Because if that sounds way too active, maybe you're more like one of my close friends instead. So she also feels overwhelmed, but she's not cleaned off her desk for about 10 years. So it's not the housework that's really getting her exhausted. Her kids' strollers and baby toys are all over the garage. Oh, did I mention that her kids are in their 20s? This friend has a part-time job that actually is set up to give her a ton of time to write. She's not very social. In fact, she loves nothing more than to spend time at home hanging out on the sofa. So she has a ton of time to write, right? Wrong. She feels super overwhelmed. See, that's the funny thing. Overwhelm can happen to anyone. It can look different for everyone. This friend of mine actually has very severe ADHD, so anything will overwhelm her. And that is normal as well, right? We talk about people who are neurodiverse or people who have processing differences or people who have these difficulties. But the fact is, so many of us have these different things that are obstacles to our getting our things done, and that are these conditions that yield this overwhelm. And that's a real problem. That's why this episode is so important. You want to write, you meant to write, but you're mentally drained, you're physically drained. Or maybe you meant to create content to support your writing career, but with everything else that needs your attention, it falls by the wayside. And you tell yourself, well, it's impossible to do it all. So whatever, I'm doing what I can. And yes, it feels that way right now with the way your life is laid out. It may literally be impossible to do all of the things that you actually kind of need to do. And when I say need to do, the truth is, if you want to be a successful author, you're going to have to do it kind of all, or at least a little of it, because all of these tasks, the author platform task, the writing task, the editing, all of that stuff needs to happen if you want to be successful in any way, right? So you're going to have to do at least a little of it, but I do not want you to burn out. And the reason we burn out is because we put these pressures on ourselves and we make things hard for ourselves, but not easy for ourselves. So let's talk a little bit about that. We need to really start to see how we're in this culture of immediate gratification, right? You want to buy a book, you no longer have to drive to the bookstore, wait for it to come in, and then buy it, drive back home. No, now you just download it immediately, right? You want to watch a movie, you don't have to wait for it to come out in theaters. Most of the time, all that content we want is right there at our fingertips. You want to go, buy something instead of going and, making sure it's in stock and everything. You can probably get it the next day on Amazon, right? So we're in a culture of immediate gratification. You want to lose weight, forget going on a diet. Let's go, get surgery and have it happen almost automatically. But it's okay for things to take longer. Immediate gratification might feel good temporarily, but that's not always the way to go. That's not how you get a quality thing. And it's not how the writing process usually works, except I will talk about some ways that we have now of making it easier on ourselves. But you do need to adopt the mindset that it's okay to take a little longer to do something, because otherwise you're never going to tackle your long-term projects. Instead, you're going to only focus on the things that have instant payoff. So it's a lot easier to make a TikTok video where you're instantly going to get a few thousand likes instead of waiting and writing this book where maybe you're going to have 50 buyers for your book and you don't know, what's going to happen. And so it's hard to follow through with this uncertain outcome instead of doing something that gives you a fast dopamine rush. And this is why, especially when it comes to writing and promoting our books, we need to break our lofty goals into tasks that are more manageable and reward ourselves for each of these tasks so that we get the gratification of like, wow, I created 4 pieces of content that I'm going to be able to share out to my audience. But more about that in a second, right? Another thing that is a huge problem is that your procrastination or your cycle of overwhelm is so entrenched in what is now a toxic cycle that it actually makes you feel negatively about the whole writing process by extension. So objectively, not doing your writing is what's making you feel bad, but your brain is kind of missing a step in analyzing what's going on, and it might be deciding that it's the whole writing thing that's making you feel bad. Think about that for a minute, because I think that this is a bigger problem than you might think. What I think this means is that you definitely need to break the cycle and purposely establish new habits. It might seem like this whole overwhelm thing is abstract, but it's absolutely not. You can sit there for years hoping to find time to write a book, but it's only when you finally decide to make time and to make space to write a book and to promote your book and to be a writer, that is when you actually start to go through the transformation. You've got to remember that writing a book is not just about the end result. It's about the process. And yes, the process is hard. It feels like it takes forever, but that's why it needs to be made rewarding along the way. And definitely don't make it overwhelming. Like when you're making this new plan, when you're turning it around and establishing a new habit, please do not shoot yourself in the foot by making it overwhelming from the get-go. So just as someone starting a health kick is going to have way more success if they decide to walk for 15 minutes a day at first, instead of saying, I'm going to go on a radical diet, no more sugar, no more fat, no more alcohol, and I'm going to go for the gym for 2 hours a day, that sets you up for crashing and burning and massive failure. So if you can commit to a 15-minute writing sprint a day and a social media post a week at first, you can ease into it. We're going to talk a little bit more about how this works towards the end of this episode, because I always like to circle back to things. I'm sometimes a little bit all over the place, but I feel that if you listen to this, it is inspiring, because sometimes some of these ideas seem like, oh, maybe they're too obvious, or maybe they seem like, oh, that makes no sense. And after you've digested it for a minute, then you're going to be ready to hear a little bit more about it. At least that's how I justify the whole thing. The goal that you have when I'm talking about creating these new habits is to banish the guilt cycle, which is not productive for anyone. Guilt has never made anyone actually do something well, and to establish consistency. Consistency is what gets you the momentum that actually moves you forward. And that's really important. Consistency and momentum create a habit, and habits are what create that massive change over time. But remember the over time bit. This is not instant. Also, you need to know that you are not doing yourself any favors by willfully ignoring any key parts of the writing process. So I've talked to a lot of clients who are super overwhelmed, and they go, oh, you're going to tell me to just focus on writing a book and the rest is going to come together, right? And I'm like, oh, no, I'm not going to say that actually, because I believe that you need to know all the moving parts that are involved so that you don't leave them by the wayside for too long and shortchange yourself. For me, any writer who's been writing their book for more than a couple months and who hasn't started building their platform, at least in some small, consistent way, they're actually hurting themselves a lot. So I never want you to ignore a key part or try to compartmentalize in such a way that you are actually ignoring some of the parts that are, so important, but you're trying to lie to yourself and tell yourself that, you can make up for it later, because sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't. However, that is not to say that you have to do it all. And we put so much pressure on ourselves to do things in a huge way. I'm going to talk about that a lot. Like we put pressure on ourselves to say, oh, this needs to be perfect. This needs to be complete. This needs to be massive. This needs to be pretty. Sometimes that's not necessary. You need to just do it in some way and you can build on that. So determine what your minimum goal is and now reverse engineer it into the small pieces and look at how things will, take time realistically. How much time do I need? And break that into those pieces and make it small goals. So for me, I've realized that there's some things that I absolutely need to do, and then some things that I'm putting too much pressure on myself to do, or to do perfectly, or to do all the time, or to do times 10. So for example, I don't need to post to social media daily. I can do it every 2 days. And at one point, I was posting multiple posts to social media per day. And very honestly, did that move the needle for me? Nope. Not really. And it actually kind of sucked the joy out of it. So, this client of mine, when she noticed that I wasn't posting to social media as much, yes, part of it was a concerted decision on my part to not post as much because I was realizing that that was part of my overwhelm. It's not necessary for me to grow online to post daily. And also I've built a following that's big enough that, if I don't post every day, it's not the end of the world. my podcast also is something else that I was putting so much pressure on myself to do. And I was making these hour-long podcasts with, full show notes and, all these extra materials. And I still produce extra materials for my writing coach on demand people, but I've learned to start batching the content so that my social media, my podcast, my extra materials, they all go together. That's really important. And so I can batch record 4 episodes if I make my episodes 30 minutes long instead of an hour long. And then I know that I can be there for my clients and I can show up in office hours with a lot more energy than if I was exhausting myself doing everything to the hilt. There's another thing also that I can reuse or tweak graphics. When I used to do the Creative Happy Hour podcast, I used to do, first of all, it was like hour or hour and a half long episodes, and we would do brand new graphics. And when I say we, I mean me. I would do new episode art for every single episode that was vastly different. And I would post that and I'd have to upload that. And I would do, a huge description and a huge campaign around every single episode. And I realized that the payoff of that wasn't that much. So with the How to Be an Author podcast, I am reusing and tweaking graphics like you wouldn't believe, because honestly, I like to tell myself that my people, my audience, they want the content. They want the stuff that's useful. How pretty the picture is, sure, might that attract another set of eyeballs? It might, but I don't need to be the graphic designer extraordinaire. That's not my job at this point. Also, I don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. So many times I try to write these blog posts with amazing, content that's structured in an interesting way, or provide a brand new worksheet for things, or again, more different graphics. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. I can do the things that work. And also, as long as I keep moving forward, it's all good. So oftentimes I'll do an audit on my processes and on the different ways I show up and the different things I'm doing to make sure it's working. So I did an audit recently and I looked at the analytics for my mailing list and I saw, wow, I have a really great open rate. So that tells me, okay, keep focusing on your emails because people are opening them and they're getting value out of them. However, then I look at my engagement on TikTok or on Instagram, for example, and I go, you know what? Maybe I can just reuse my TikToks. I don't even need to take the watermark off, because Instagram for me has become a little bit of a haunted shipyard, right? It's not working as much. So what I've decided to do is to make my Instagram into a landing page. And I'm going to do that as soon as I have time. And I've told myself, okay, this is something that can wait until later, because I'm still using Instagram to post stories about the podcast, for example, and about my course, but that's about it. Right? So that's what my audit on those processes told me. And also my audit on what I'm doing as a writer told me, hey, you know what? You get a kick out of writing and you've not been writing enough on your own personal projects. So how do you make it work that you can do that without shortchanging your clients that are really important to you? Well, that's something that I'm working on. So remember, this can be a work in progress. You don't have to flip a switch. I mean, there is a transformation that happens when you decide to start making time and space for writing, but sometimes this is something that needs to be planned for. It can't be instant, right? You can't just be like, oh, I'm going to drop everything I have going on at work because writing is important. No, but you can start to, take on less projects, or you can start to really have people respect your time and your space. All of these things are ways in which you can plan to have more time and space for writing as you go along. Another thing that you can do in your writing, and this is something I see in a lot of my clients, they have that pressure to make their writing and everything they produce absolutely perfect right now. So they're editing all the time, and then they've got this researchitis. And researchitis is something that hits me too when I'm making content. Let me tell you about that, because you all make content probably, but I have a client who is amazing, and she produced this work that I was really impressed with. I'm like, wow, for kind of a first pass, this is a really, really great high quality piece. And then she starts telling me about how she's been worrying so much about researching this specific bus that she has in her story that, did it actually run in London back in this specific year? And I'm like, girl, I don't think that really matters at this juncture. Now, if you have nothing else going on and you want to research that exact bus, great. But how much does this actually matter to your story? It doesn't, right? It doesn't. You've created this great version of London back in a certain era. You don't need to have all of these specific things right unless your audience is made up of historians. And then why are they reading fictions? Right? So that's important. For me too, I know this writing thing. I know all of the ways to, for example, break through writer's block, or I know what an inciting incident is, or I know what, conflict and tension are. But every time I go to write a blog post or to create an infographic or to create a worksheet for you guys, I tend to research it to death only to come up with the same stuff that I already knew. So that is another way that we overwhelm ourselves by thinking, oh, there's got to be something else out there. Yes, sure, there's always something else out there, though. That's the thing. There's always something else. There's always something you missed. But sometimes our best at that time is all we're going to do. Something else that's really crucial is that taking shortcuts that work and doing hacks that work, that's not cheating. Just because you're making it easier on yourself doesn't mean that you are not a real writer. I know so many writers who feel guilty using, for example, my dictation hack that I teach you how to use in detail in my upcoming course, From Idea to Published in 6 months. They feel guilty. They're like, that's not real writing. Who says? Who says? You're a writer. If you're a writer and you're doing it, then that is what real writers do. Now, you want to eliminate the overwhelm that comes from too much of anything. So too many moving parts, too much unstructured time, too many tasks, too many choices, all of those things. When you know that you have too much of something, that's when overwhelm happens. So let me urge you again to write down all those things that are overwhelming you. Write it all down, right? It really helped me actually when I was talking about this podcast and I was thinking about, what's overwhelming me this week, and writing down that litany of things. It was really helpful because I looked at it and I thought to myself, you know what? Roto-Rooter can do their job on their own, and I can step out for a moment to do my job. Or, my clients know that they have me on call, and it's fair enough for me to take a little bit extra time as I edit something to focus on my own work for a minute, as long as I keep delivering as I promised. And sometimes I promise to deliver faster than I am physically able. So that's an important thing. Look at your goals and think to yourself, why am I shooting myself in the foot by having a goal that I know from the get-go is pretty much impossible? It's too ambitious. So too much of anything is bad. Too many options are bad. Too many writing tools or programs, too many notebooks, too many characters, all of those things are going to hurt you when it comes to being productive. And sometimes being formulaic is what works. So when I tell writers who are stuck to use, for example, the Save the Cat beat sheet or the story spine, I'm not trying to make them write something that's boring and that's overly formulaic, but sometimes using the same structure, using the same process, using what has been proven to work for you, and then branching out, sometimes that's what will break you out of that overwhelm. And when it comes to content, feel free to reuse or recycle. We're always trying to come up with something new. And you know what? That is pressure that we put on ourselves unnecessarily. How much of your audience actually saw that blog post? How much of your audience actually saw that Instagram reel? Bring back that popular post, tweak it a little bit if you want to, repost things from last year. Take that picture and crop it differently and put it back up proudly. No one cares. And you might be capturing brand new eyeballs, Or, you know what? I've put things back up sometimes and I'll have people come to me and be like, oh, thank you so much for reposting that piece of advice. I saw it last year and I couldn't remember exactly what you said and then I couldn't find it. And then it comes across my feed again and I'm appreciative. So remember that people aren't going to judge you and be like, wow, what a lazy person for only slightly tweaking that piece of content. If someone is focusing so much on you, well, they don't have a very busy life, that's for sure. But guess what? At least you're creating content. At least you're putting things out there. Another wonderful thing to do when you are overwhelmed is do what's easy first. Again, why this guilt about things being easy? Why being like, oh, this isn't as important because it's easy for me or because I had fun doing it? Do what's easy first. What if there's a task that you find impossible to do? Make it easier, right? Make things that aren't easy easier. How do you do that? You break it down into smaller pieces or more simple pieces. If there is something that you are really resisting, if there's something that is really a pain in the butt for you, examine why. You might want to revisit the episode of the How to Be an Author podcast that I did a little while ago about resistance, because I think this is the most crucial thing. Sometimes we're fighting something and we're dreading something because it's not aligned with who we are as a writer and as a creative. So that's key. If you're overwhelmed by the process of writing this particular book, is this book too complicated? Do you have too many characters that don't make any sense? Is your storyline convoluted? It might be, right? It might be. Or are you stuck creating a funnel that involves like 1,000 moving parts for your mailing list? Ask yourself, is that necessary? Is that really what your audience needs? I think you might find that it's not. Right? So that's why in my course From Idea to Published in 6 months, I've created checklists. I've broken things down into tasks to eliminate the guesswork. And I have tried to remove all of the extraneous stuff that you do not need. I'm giving you a full solution with exactly what you need, nothing more, nothing less, so that you can actually focus on writing your book, publishing your book, and building your platform in 6 months without any of the guesswork, without torturing yourself, right? But also, I tell people at the beginning of my course, you know what? 6 months is just a guideline. Sometimes it's impossible to do that, right? Sometimes the thing that's supposed to help you is what's overwhelming you. And that's really important. So let's say that you buy my course From Idea to Publish in 6 months, and all of a sudden you are feeling really bad because you're like, this 6-month thing is impossible. And you start to try to do the checklist and you feel like you're in a race against time. Maybe it's not working for you in that exact form, right? So if in the case of my course, I would say that, okay, tell yourself, okay, how long realistically do I think it'll take? Let me divide these modules in 2. Let me do this book in a year. And maybe that's better. So sometimes the thing that's supposed to help is the thing that is overwhelming you. So I know some people who joined my writing group and then all of a sudden they're overwhelmed because they're like, oh my God, I've got all this extra time I need to be taking to critique other people's work. And I was like, wait a second, but we don't actually take people's work home in our writing group. We do it right there. And they're like, oh yeah, but some people approached me and they asked me if I could critique their work on top of it. And I thought that this is part of being in writing group. No, baby, no. Right? If the part of the thing that's supposed to be helping you is hurting you instead, do an audit. And don't feel bad about saying, you know what? The extra time that I'm taking to meet, to critique, to spend energy on doing this thing, it doesn't feel like it's working right now. I had someone who actually reached out to me this week and they said, you know, your program, Writing Coach on Demand, it's such great material. It's such great content. I really appreciate what you're doing, but I've found that I haven't been able to commit to signing up for the extra office hours and I haven't had time to listen to the extra materials. And it's kind of really not a good time for me. I so appreciated hearing that from that client because that is so sincere. It's so true. And so I told them, you know, absolutely, I've cut off your thing. You're not going to be getting any recurring payments anymore, but I urge you to circle back, do what you can But that's great that they knew that they were dangerously approaching burnout. That is so important to know when the thing that's supposed to be helping is not helping. So, for example, I tell people to work from an outline. I think this helps so much. But again, I had a client this week who calls me and she's like, outlines really stress me out. So I told her, I said, you don't need to do an outline. Think of just scenes that you want to write and just jot those down and then use those instead of an outline, because the idea of the outline is stressing you out. Fair enough. For her, it was kind of because the outline, she wanted to make it perfect and to complete and all of that. And that's why it was stressing her out, right? But it's fair enough to say, you know what? I've really tried and this is not helping. Can we find something else that works? Fair enough. Make it easy. I have other people come to me and they say, I bought this program or this app that is supposed to help me to organize my writing and organize my thoughts, but it's got this super steep learning curve and it's got me super confused. Hey, I get it. This is why I don't use any other programs. I use Word and I use Notes, things like that, because that's the way my brain works. But some people say that those writing programs are priceless for them. Fair enough. Don't feel guilty that things don't work for you. Don't feel guilty that you're taking longer. Don't feel guilty that your process is different. Don't feel guilty that you took a shortcut. Eliminate the guilt. The guilt is also overwhelming and making you feel bad. This is life. This is normal. So don't feel bad. Just figure out how to move forward. So let me recap the parts that you can do to stop from feeling overwhelmed and make time and space for writing in your life. Number one, build a habit so you eliminate the guilt cycle. Build a habit. You see what that means? That means it's going to take a few steps. It's going to have a few ingredients, a few pieces. It's not going to happen overnight, but build that habit so that you have consistent moving forward. Even if it's slow, that's what you need. Number two, set up a writing space. Now, this is pretty important because it's so much easier to have your equipment on hand. That eliminates one of the obstacles that you sometimes have of like, oh my God, I need to set up my laptop and then I have to, make sure it's a quiet space. I need to set up my keyboard and da 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 da. These are small things, but when you're overwhelmed, each one of those things feels a lot bigger. It adds up. Right? And if you don't have a dedicated writing space, those little things add up. It's a lot. And then you feel guilty. You look at your writing space, you look at your laptop that's on the kitchen table, and it looks like just another piece of clutter. And you start to feel guilty about that. And then you start looking at the other things you need to do. This is why having a consistent writing space is great. And for me, I've created a writing space, which is not ideal, but that's just because my current living situation is not ideal, but I write in front of the fireplace in my breakfast nook. And honestly, it's a really pleasant space. Now, the bad part of it is that other people are there, the dog is there, my daughter is there, my husband can walk through, but also being in front of the fire and writing and looking out into the garden, that's a real treat. So that makes me look forward to being in my writing space. But the problem for me is, and this is something I'm starting to see that might apply to you as well, is that my writing space is also my other workspace. So it's hard for me to make the writing part feel special and different. So that's something important. Another part of this whole writing space thing is definitely keep your outline open or nearby. Like I love to print out my outline and have it on, the wall in front of me if possible. Or I like to have my outline in a notebook right next to me. Or I actually have it also open on my desktop. So I am such a mess, but I'll keep a lot of things open on the desktop of my computer so that it is easy access. So that I know that, hey, don't know what to do right now? Work on this, my friend. So that really helps. Another crucial thing is get rid of the distractions. Some of these distractions are things that we do, right? We tell ourselves we have to do this non-essential stuff, and we tell ourselves we need a playlist to actually write, and we tell ourselves that we need this particular snack, and we tell ourselves that we can write, around our family. And you know what? Sometimes, but for me, like full disclosure, I had to yell at my husband before recording this podcast. He for some reason, is weird. He loves to make non-essential noise whenever I happen to be recording. And I try to be good. I try to be accommodating, but I snapped. And I realized, you know what? My husband, my kids, my dog, they disrespect me and my writing and my podcasting because I let them. I let them because I feel guilty. Get it? Loved ones will guilt you. You will guilt yourself. So if you can find a time and a place that is just for you for doing this writing thing, it starts to feel like a luxury and a necessity. And I think that that's really, really important. And you need to overcome the excuses. When you feel like you need to make an excuse, it's because you have made a different choice than making the choice to write. You've made a different choice and now you're lying to justify it. You're lying to others. You're lying to yourself. You're saying, oh, I had to do this other thing. This other thing was absolutely essential and my writing wasn't. So see how that starts to yield again this like cycle of feeling bad and guilty and horrible. So create a schedule for writing time. Now, not a schedule that someone else came up with. Not that ideal picturesque schedule of, I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m., wonderful quiet time. I'm going to sit with my coffee at my picturesque writing desk with my books in the background, and I'm going to be writing. No, that maybe it means sitting in your car dictating for 10 minutes after you dropped off your kid at school. Maybe it means that. There is no shame in it. Stop telling yourself a story about what a real writer is. You are a real writer. So if your writing time is literally 15 minutes of dictation while you're on the toilet, I do not care. I won't tell anyone. This is what it needs to be. So be it. There's also a great way of setting up a word count target for yourself and set it lower than you even think that you could ever do, right? Set it ridiculously low for yourself. So think of a number of words that you can do that you think, wow, this is lame. Like there's no way I wouldn't be able to write that number. So let's pretend it's 250, right? And you're like, wow, if I can't write at least 250 words a day, I'm like a total loser, right? Chances are you will get frustrated with yourself for only writing 250. Fine, go ahead, write more. But do not increase that goal. I want you to know that you've hit your goal every single day. So I set my reading goal on my laptop or on my iPad. I set my reading goal at like 2 minutes a day so that every time I read for 2 minutes a day, I get this like, congratulations, you've hit your goal. And you know what? It feels good because sometimes 2 minutes a day is all I can muster. And same thing goes for writing, right? So on some days, maybe on most days, that 250 that you thought was so lame when you were setting the goal, it might feel insurmountable. And if you're not capable of 250 words a day, don't think that I mean that you're less than. Some of us have dyslexia or life or anything else. Hell, aim for 50 words a day. Aim for 10 words a day. Oh, does that mean your book's going to take longer to write? Yes, it does. Why is that a problem? You're not in a race. No one said you had to finish your book in a certain amount of time. Now, it's fair to have a goal and say, I want to finish my book this year, but sometimes just finishing that book is all we can do. So again, even though I have a course called From Idea to Publish in 6 months, I regularly take more than 6 months to write a book, either because I have to or because I want to. So remember that that's fine. Remember to reward yourself for finding time for writing. Reward yourself for hitting your goals. And then plan your writing sessions accordingly. Planning is key. Again, you don't find time, you make time. And this is a practice. You don't immediately banish overwhelm. You immediately decide to try to do it and make a plan, but it takes consistent action over time to make a new habit and to make changes that stick. So that's it. I hope this episode makes you feel a little bit better about that overwhelm. And if you are a writing coach on demand person, now you get to move on to your bonus episode, which is going to be a lot more about establishing those healthy habits and about the hacks that actually can save so much time in your platform and in your writing. And then if you're not on Writing Coach on Demand, you might consider joining, because if you join Writing Coach on Demand, you're going to have 20% off the course From Idea to Publish in 6 months. And you'll also be able to check in so much more so that you'll have the accountability so you can keep moving forward with that course. It's really, really helpful to have the office hours along with the course, I think. So it was a pleasure being with you all, and I look forward to being with you next week. Wish me luck with my plumbing, and I will talk to you soon. Never hesitate to reach out and email me if you need me, and check out www.creativeandwritingcoach.com. Bye. If you have any pressing writing-related questions or would like to be featured on the How to Be an Author podcast, please feel free to reach out on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com.